Let me say one little thing about this jacket I'm wearing. Because the letters Samik, Ayin, Pei are in the covered place, known as the Kadosh place. The word place is actually Shem. So you could call it the Shem Kadosh is the Kadosh place. Kadosh meaning separated, set apart. It was covered in the tent. So Samik, Ayin, Pei, I'm wearing this black jacket. Now on this we have the Nun Samik patch, which is you might say the emblem of the class. Right, and so Nun Samik, we had the week between the Nun and the Samik. We had a week where we talked pretty much exclusively about the Nun Samik and the concepts embedded there. The reason for having a Selah week, stop and think about it, is what Selah means, Samik Lamed Hey. We had a Selah week there, and we had a Selah week between the Zion and the Het. Zion means to cut off, it's a weapon. Het is a fence, which is a barricade, as it were. So between being cut off and then a fenced-off area, it seemed like, well, that was a week for a Selah. So 7 worked as a group, and then between the 7th letter Zion and the 8th letter Het, we had the Selah, stop and think about it. And they said they put their harps up in the trees, they suspended them, and the word Selah has to do with willow trees and suspending the harps, and so we had the harp in the background, like up in the willow branches. And then you have the spring feasts, Pesach, Chag HaMatzot, and Shavuot. Those are out in the courtyard, lining up with the Mishkan pattern of the big white fence, the altar of sacrifice, like a barbecue grill, and the laver, which is basically a big pool of water made out of the bronze mirrors of the women. They weren't shiny glass with silver on them, they were polished bronze. So the bronze laver was made out of the bronze mirrors of the women and has to do with bringing forth in kind of feminine concepts. But those are the spring feasts. And then there's the set-apart place, lining up with the fall feast, the 7th month. So there's this break. So we had a Selah, that's where we had the Nun Samik break between the Memnun, or between the Nun and the Samik. Memnun being the laver, Samik lining up with the menorah, Ayin, table of showbread, the judgment scales, Yom Kippur. So you got Yom Teruah lining up with the menorah. That's where we had the sun, moon, and stars. So we played the trumpet music, the flugelhorn by Jeff Foster with the sun, with the planets, sun, moon, and stars on display. The fish and the birds of day 5 of creation, judgment scales, and just like you have the inhabitants of the deep, the fish, and the inhabitants of the above, the air, the birds. So with the ayin has to do with the word for ocular, where we get the word occult, which has to do with the spirit realm. And again, there seems to be the expression of a diversification in realms of the spiritual, those of the deep, the abyss, otherwise known as demons, and those of the higher realm, those of Yahweh's messengers, what we call angels. In the past, in ancient days, they were all called demons. Demon wasn't bad and angel good. They were just, demons were the spirit beings. We don't know what they are. We haven't been given clear view, nor have we been given clear words as to what these beings or creatures are, nor have we been given a clear understanding of their constraints or restrained limits of, you might say, interface with our realm. All we have been given in the scripture is suggested reference to, you might call it a fact, that they exist. They meaning, apparently going back to the ayin, those of the inhabitants of the deep and those of the inhabitants of the above. That's where you get the word occult, dealing with the spirit world. An interesting thing, I heard on the radio a Catholic station, and they were talking about, I think it was a Jesuit guy, that was back in the 1700s. And he wanted to come to America and preach the gospel to the Iroquois and various other Indians on the American seaboard. And he was dealing with some archbishop, and he actually had a conversation with the Pope once or twice, and the Pope commissioned him to do this or that. And he had a lot of political problems, and people didn't like him. He was quite a zealot. And these people on the Catholic radio station were reading a narrative of his biography, and they said this one time he was standing there having this communication with an apparition of a woman floating in the air, a light being. Now you can look at the word in Hebrew for what's translated the word ghost, and it means one who has the apparent emanation of light like a lampshade, but they're immaterial. Now, even in the Hebrew word in the dictionary suggests that what we call ghosts, they, oh, do you believe in ghosts? It's like, it suggests there's a reality to them. But we're not given clear instruction or definition concerning their, again, the parameters. How far can they go? How do they interface, engage with us? What are the limits of our talking to them, dealing with them, referencing them, speaking to them? But this guy, this Jesuit priest, saw this one apparition of this woman, and they were suggesting, that the people reading of his biography, that this was an apparition of the Virgin Mary. Another occasion, this guy was he was, I guess, kneeling down talking. This apparition was talking to him, and a messenger came in, a young man, a messenger came in, and he didn't interrupt him. And later, he was talking to the guy, and he said, I have a message from so-and-so, and I came in to talk to you, but I didn't want to interrupt while you were talking to this floating apparition. And he says, oh, you saw her. You must be a special young man, because not many people get to see her. Now, I won't say that that didn't happen. It must have happened. The question is, who was he talking to? There's a certain book that a friend showed me, and I'm not even going to go into it, but the book was called Urantia. And I think I remember hearing about this book back in the 70s. And the guy opened up and he said, don't tell anybody I have this book. But he said, could you tell me what you think about this one page? So I read this page and I thought, this sounds like super secret, super intellectual information concerning the mechanics of the universe and the dynamics of these spirit beings in other dimensions, maybe on other galaxies and other planets, interfacing with humans on the face of the earth. And there's some talk, I think it's in the book of Jasher, that these, call them space aliens or call them demonic manifestations or maybe real creatures, have been on the earth and actually taught mankind forms of metallurgy and warfare. That maybe these, what might be called titans of the Greek mythology, maybe showed up and coerced or kind of gave the incentive for humans to start destroying each other, similar to Balaam giving Israel the incentive to start whoring and going after other deities. And as we talked about last week, what Balaam said specifically was, I don't have it right here. He said, because there is no iniquity or divination or sorcery in Israel. These are words that Yahweh put in Balaam's mouth. Because there's no iniquity, sorcery, divination, perversion in Israel, then Yahweh is with them, they are blessed, they cannot be cursed. So he couldn't pronounce a blessing, or he couldn't pronounce a cursing on them. And that's when Balak said, listen, don't even open your mouth. Because every time I ask you to curse them and you open your mouth, you utter a blessing. So just don't even open your mouth. Don't say a blessing or a curse. And he said, well, listen, Now later on in another passage, elsewhere, we find out that Balaam said, listen, let's think about this. If Yahweh says there's no perversion, there's no divination, there's no sorcery, see, these all talk about the scales of balance, the occult awareness. Because there's no messing around with this stuff, they're regarding the words of Yahweh, so they're getting the blessing. So what we need to do, Balak, is you send in your women surreptitiously. In Hebrew, if you see a letter tav, according to the Red Dictionary, it basically means sub, hypo, like hypodermic, or under. It basically means surreptitiously. Sneaking in from underneath. He said, send in your young women, the best ones you got, the prettiest ones you got. Teach them how to enchant and bewitch and bamboozle and befuddle. Remember, I think it was Frank Sinatra sang a song about that. You know, and we think, oh, that's just American classic song. No, that's Balaam sorcery, to sing about being bewitched and be bewildered and bedazzled and enchanted. If you notice on American TV lately, I don't watch hardly any TV, but you see a couple commercials for the upcoming season. There's a lot of that stuff going on. As a matter of fact, there's a certain commercial enterprise that owns. I heard Stan Motif on the radio, and he said there's like 6 groups, corporations that own all the airwaves in the United States. One of them is known as the Enchanted Kingdom or the Magic Kingdom, and they own, I think it was ABC or something. But the point is, most of their stuff has to do with fairies and magic and genies. And if you look at the Oregon lottery thing, I've noticed every time I walk into like a restaurant and you see like an advertisement for the lotto thing, they always use the iconography, the graphics of things having to do with psychics, wizards, witches, sorcery, genies, all this stuff. Why? Because it's their turf. It's their stuff. And you can say, well, I'm not against playing the lottery. I'm not telling you that. But what I'm saying is, notice who's using what images to capture what part of your psyche. Yahweh says, if Israel messes with any of these things, they have stepped out from under the covenant and they're going to catch anything coming at them. The fists, the bludgeons, the crushing blows of their enemy. If they're not doing these things, they're under my protection, and anybody messes with them messes with the pupil of my eye, because Israel is the dearest, most sacred treasure in the entire universe. In the week of the Psalmic, where we talked about, look what Yahweh has made. The full expanse of the universe, unless it's like a Mobius strip that is limited, but it looks to us like it's unlimited. But Yahweh has said, I am the one who have designed and created the full expanse of everything I have chosen to call my own possession. And the pinnacle, the bullseye of that possession is Israel. But Yahweh says, and I will protect Israel with my vengeance of my own passionate soul. He says, Alkona, Kuf Nun Hey or Kuf Nun Aleph is jealous and zealous over his people. But, he says, my people step outside, that's it. Not only is, oh, gee, you're outside, but he says, I myself will turn against you as your adversary like you ain't seen nothing. Like I've said before, the devil, Satan, is like a little pussycat. And Yahweh like this fierce tiger that's enraged when his people step outside. And you don't worry about the devil if Yahweh's against you. The devil ain't nothing on Yahweh. The point about this is, Balaam put 2 and 2 together and said, surreptitiously send in the thing and let Israel kill itself, which is what he did. So here's the point. How do we get back what we lost? We quit doing what lost it for us, and we go back to the things that gives us the preservation with Yahweh's attention. So here I want to show you concepts where you see the meanings of the letters. I've been trying to do this type of thing for the whole class, and I've tried to show you different verses where if you know the meanings of the letters, you'll see how the meanings of the letters are embedded. So I maintained that according to the pattern, the Psalmic eye and pay are in this covered area, and that the Psalmic has to do with principalities or jurisdictions of responsibility, like a good servant on a watchtower overlooking the field. Ayin has to do with judgment or wisdom or understanding, or days of justice where what goes around comes around, or it has to do with the occult. And then the pay has to do with Sukkot, with fellowship, because it was day 6 when he created the animals and man. It has to do with communication, like the altar of incense. It has to do with prayers, singing, rejoicing, speaking, listening to his words, his breath. When he breathed into Adam and gave him words, he had a perfect communicative relationship with the creature that he made, Adam, which means red earth or vapor of blood, which has to do, vapor is like a moist gas. Aleph dalet is vapor, dalet mem is blood. So man is a vapor and breath and blood, you might say. And the scriptures tell us that life is in the blood. So I'm saying when you look at Hebrew, you put all these things together and you get these other pictures. So here you go to Numbers 18:7. And now he's talking about the priests of Aaron. He says, you and your sons with you shall, now listen to this phrase, safeguard the priesthood regarding every matter of the altar and within the curtain. This has to do with safeguarding. So when he gave the Kohanim their job responsibilities, he said, within the curtain, what's in the curtain? The menorah, the table showbread, and the altar of incense. These three things are within the curtain. And he says, you shall safeguard the priesthood, and you shall serve. I presented your priesthood as a service, which is a gift. And any alien who approaches shall die. You see, in America, in the Christian church, we say, gee, what kind of career you want, young man? Would you like to be a minister? Would you like to be a priest? If you weren't called into the priesthood, if you were an alien, if you were not one who knew the charges of the prescribed instructions of the pay of the mouth of Yahweh, you don't just say, oh, I'd like to be a priest, please. You're put to death if you haven't come close to this stuff. Yahweh spoke to Aaron, verse 8, and said, and I, behold, I have given you the shamar, that's like the shamar, watch, keep, and guard, of my heave offerings, all the kadoshi b'nai Israel, all the sacred things of the children of Israel, I have given them to you for distinction, and to your sons as an eternal portion. In the land you shall have no heritage, and a share you shall not have among them. I am your share and your heritage among the children of Israel. If anybody presumes to be a priest, that's a different matter. But we trying to be a kingdom of priests, again, there's places of discussion. Is he talking about the genetical descendants of Levi? Is he talking about the kingdom of priests, which is all Israel? The point is, there's plenty of room for discussion. But I'm trying to show you what he says, that Yahweh says, I am your portion. I am your heritage among the children of Israel. Whatever concerns those other children of Israel, the other 12 tribes have. They're getting houses, they're getting fields, they're doing occupations, they're getting retirement benefits, they're doing all this stuff. You, Kohanim, this is not for you. I'm your portion. Don't even regard your matters. You eat the bread that's inside the set-apart place. Your duties are to maintain the charge that I have given you. And I'm not ripping you off. This is a gift. You're the special people. And this isn't the tribe of Judah. This is the Levites. This is the tribe of Levi. It's a whole different thing. If you look at Psalm 34 as a pattern, again, we're discussing words. We're going to talk about these charts in a minute, but I'm telling you things about word patterns. Each verse starts with the letter. In English, you won't see it, but if you look at it in Hebrew and you read each verse in Psalm 34, it starts with the letter, just like Psalm 119. It has a pattern. But if you look closer at Psalm 34, each verse you'll realize embodies the meaning of the letter also. So if you go to Psalm 34 and you look at it in Hebrew, notice that each verse starts with the letter. First one Aleph, next one Bet, next one Gimel, so forth through the 22. But take the time to read the whole verse and contemplate what is he saying and how does that whole verse actually embody the meanings of the letters that we're talking about. You won't see that that's even mentioned in the rabbinical commentary in the Tanakh, in the Stone's Tanakh. Maybe the rabbis know it, maybe they don't, but they're not talking about it. Again, where do you get this information? You can sit there and look at it and ponder it. You look at Proverbs 31 woman, it's also broken down into each one of the verses is talking about that letter meaning. If you go to Psalm 119, we're not going to talk about this tonight, but I'm thinking that because, going back to the pattern, there's another veil. There's one more veil in the pattern, and that's between the pei and the zadi. This was the veil keeping the kadosh place, samek ayin pei, the menorah, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, that are in the kadosh place. Then there was this veil. It was pretty thick. I think it was about a foot thick, I heard it said, woven. The Kadosh Kadashim, the ultimately set apart place. There's a veil. So because of this veil, we're going to have one more Selah, and I'd like to probably talk about Psalm 119 in a very unusual way, because it has to do with Pei and Zadi. Just like we had a break between Nun and Zadi, and between Zion and Cat, here's a break between Pei and Zadi. Well, the word Pei Zadi means an open mouth. A mouth is something which can be closed. A mouth being revealed is Yahweh revealing his secrets. Brad Scott talks about the word sod, Samech Vav Dalet, means family secrets. When you're in the Kadosh place, this is the priest. This is not for everybody of Israel. This is not for any lackey or any laity who happens to wander in and say, "Oh, can I have some of that bread?" Like David did. What gave him the right? That's a whole other story, to come in and ask bread from the table of showbread. It ended up getting the entire, I think 70 priests got killed on account of that with Saul. That was a whole other story. But I'm just mentioning that there's ramifications, there's repercussions, things happen when you step outside of the order, and whether David had a right to or not, that's a different story. That's one for midrashing and discussing. But what I'm saying is that between the Pei and the Zadi, the word Pei Zadi literally means open mouth. If there's something closed regarding Yahweh's words, how do you open it? The word maskil is used in some of the Psalms, and it literally means an intellectual riddle or conundrum, like a crossword puzzle, might be kind of maskil. In other words, you got to apply some thinking, and you got to stop, and you got to take some time, and pour yourself a cup of coffee, and sit there and try to figure out what are they doing here? What's the pattern? Psalm 119 is a maskil. I'm not sure if it says it's a maskil, but the thing is about Psalm 119, and I'd like to address this next week. I'm just going to feed your appetite a little bit, is that there's 22 sections of Psalm 119. Each section has 8 verses. Each verse in Hebrew starts with the letter of that section. So there's 8 words, 8 verses, but 8 words starting with the letter Aleph. The next section has 8 verses, 8 words, all starting with the letter Bet. So forth and so on all the way through. You understand the picture? Now, here's a question. If it's a maskil, if it's a riddle, where would the riddle be? What's the nature of the riddle? Would you even thought that there's a riddle embedded in Psalm 119? Let's suggest that there is a riddle in Psalm 119. Where would you look? Okay, you can see the format. The format's very clear, though there's some English Bibles that don't even address it. Some English Bibles have the header section of each section with the Hebrew letter. This is the letter Aleph, and they'll have 8 verses. This is the letter Bet, and they'll have 8 verses. But if you read those verses, I've tried to do this, it's like, even knowing what the letters mean, I got to struggle to see if I can pull out of every phrase whether David was really talking about that letter. In Psalm 34, he seems to be doing exactly that, but Psalm 119 is a little bit different. It's a little trickier. You can't quite get it. But if David was going to hide something in Psalm 119, where do you suppose he was going to hide it? And when I'm talking about hiding things, remember the letter Sod is family secrets. It's not open to anybody. There's other words that talk about being hiding. One of them is Samech Tav Resh, Sitar. And remember, this whole class is based on Daniel 12, where he says, hide the words and seal the book until the time. And the word until the time is Ayin Dalet, Ayin Tav. Ayin Dalet literally means until, but remember when we talked about previous session, the word that means and ever, Le'olam Va'ed, forever and ever. And how do you get beyond eternity? The letter Ayin Dalet, if you look up in the dictionary, it doesn't just mean and ever, because the word Ayin Dalet is also a witness or a testifier. The word moed, mem vav ayin dalet, is translated season. He put the stars in the sky according to their seasons. It's also the word for appointed festival, the place of meeting. If you call an assembly of soldiers, they're supposed to meet at a certain time and place at, remember the mem is the location, right? Mem, the location, the place of the testimony? No, what the ayin dalet means there is, when you show up, That is the witness that you're obeying the command to be at the place at the right time. The testimony is only the people that show up are the people who are regarding the command to show up. The testimony that you're regarding the command is that you're there. So we talked about when Yahweh says, I am Yahweh, then they'll know that I am Yahweh. What does that mean? It's this pattern that he has embedded all through the scriptures that says, I'm the guy that says something. Again, if you go back to the meaning of the letter Aleph, it means to plan or to purpose. What does the letter Tav mean? The accomplishment of the plan or the purpose as it was said. So we talked about last week when he says, Ehyeh, Asher, Ehyeh. He says, here's this thing, Ehyeh, I will be. And then there's this straight line, Asher, like Ishar, like Israel, right? The straight line. And then Ehyeh. So this looks just like that, and there's a straight line connecting them. Well, on the bottom, this is a little bit off the track, but just so you know, on the bottom of this thing, there's that same symbol. I have Asher and I have Yod-He Yod. When he said, let there be light, he says, Yehi, Yod-He Yod, and then there was the word Or. And what happened? Yehi Or. So what extended was, when he said Yehi, was also Yehi. In other words, what happened is exactly what he said. It wasn't let there be, and there was. Yehi, Yehi. Ehyeh, Ehyeh. I said it was going to happen. It's going to happen. You'll know that I am Yahweh because what I said happened looks just like what happened. And when I gave a command, it ended up being that. And when I said this is for eternity, this is for eternity. And when I give a word, it will not return to me void. It'll be coming and accomplishing exactly what I set it forth to do. And when Yeshua said, don't ask to see the Father, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father, because it looks just like me. I haven't said anything that I didn't hear the Father saying. I don't do anything that I don't see the Father doing. You can't tell the difference between me and him because they're like these two dots connected to that. It's the pattern embedded all through the scriptures concerning his identity. Who is he? Thus, when a doctrine or another religion comes around with a different Messiah and says, oh, by the way, he changed something, it breaks the pattern. You've got a disconnect, which means it ain't him. It's a different guy. And if a different apparition shows up and tells you something contrary to his words, how do you know whether the apparition that this Jesuit saw or the apparition of anybody that anybody else sees? Joseph Smith of the Mormons claimed to have had an angel show up and show him golden tablets. Was he lying or did he see it? I don't know. Maybe he saw it. Did the words on the tablets agree with, confirm, or contradict the words of the Torah? If they contradicted the words of the Torah, I got nothing to do with it. The interesting thing about Urantia is it's now talking about stuff which may be true, I don't know. But the point is, in Deuteronomy 29:29, Yahweh says, or I think it was Moshe said, the things which are unseen, that's Yahweh's business. They're unto Yahweh. But the things that are revealed are for us and for our children to keep the words of this Torah. Now, whether or not there's other information, whether or not there's other manifestations, whether or not there's anything else in the universe, isn't our concern. It's not the food presented to us on the table. He said, I am Kadosh, set apart. Therefore, Israel, you are to be Kadosh. And because I'm Kadosh, and therefore you ought to be Kadosh, I'm going to give you a list of food that's going to be on your menu. Do not eat these items. These items are your food. So when someone else walks up and says, hey, a spirit entity gave me revelation concerning the things that are going on the other side of the universe. Is that the food we were given to eat? No. What food did he give us to eat? The Torah. Did a spirit manifestation actually show up and talk to somebody and give them this download of Urantia? Maybe, probably. I'm not going to say it didn't happen. All I can say is, then this fellow came by one day and he started talking about the various Melchizedeks. And I go, wait a second. There's nothing in the Torah about the various Melchizedeks. Have you been eating at the trough of Urantia? Whoa, I've been had. I said, do you think you can eat a pile of garlic and then come into the room and belch and nobody will know you've been eating garlic? We have been given certain stuff to eat certain words to consume. And we were told to leave the other stuff alone. Ayin Zadi Vav Resh. The word Ayin Zadi, etz. Well, it's a tree, it's a wood, it's a handle. Ayin Zadi Hay is what is revealed from the tree. Which tree? It doesn't say which tree. But the word Ayin Zadi Hay, and actually this word is over here embedded on the chart, and it says over on the right-hand side. Anyway, it says something about advice. Are we going to heed his advice, or do we have closed eyes? Why did I say that? Again, there's a bunch of riddles embedded in this chart. You see, if you look in the Red Dictionary, this word atzah literally means both advice and closed eyes. It's the same word. Which is it? Is it his advice, or are we going to close our eyes to his advice? Or does it mean if we don't heed his advice, he's going to close our eyes? We're going to get closed eyes. The word Ayin Zadi, and if you make it a Vav Resh, which is the word for light, what you get is retained, restrained, shut up, forbidden, prohibited, withheld, imprisoned, detained, barren, sterile, constipated, or the letter for a consonant, and the word for consonant, Ayin Zadi Resh has to do with hindered, ruled, arrested state. In other words, it's talking about light ceasing. If you tie these things together. Numbers 23:20, Yahweh appeared and we already talked about that. No iniquity, perversity. Isaiah 29:10. Think about this. Ponder it and be astonished. They have been utterly blinded. They were drunk, but not from wine. They staggered, not for liquor. For Yahweh has poured upon you a spirit of deep sleep. He has closed your eyes. He has covered the prophets and your seers. To you, all the prophecy is like, and it's not talking about necessarily prophetic words, it's also just Yahweh's expression, is like the words of a sealed document which one gives to a literate person saying, please read this, and he says, I cannot, it is sealed. Then the document is given to an illiterate person saying, read this, and he says, I can't read it, I'm illiterate. That's not what he said. He's speaking Hebrew. What he said is, Lo yirati sefer. I'm going to show you a little bit of a riddle. If you give a sealed book to a literate person, and he says, what Yahweh has decreed is sealed, I can't read it. There's some mysterious spiritual dynamic of blindness that's been placed on the ability to read literately. And I don't know if we'll get to them all, because we're, again, quickly running out of time, but I've got a number of verses just like this to show you, where Yahweh said, he will close the wisdom of the wise and the eyes of the seer. But I'm going to show you the illiterate. We went through this once before, and again, for the sake of repetition, maybe you know things now that you didn't know at the beginning of the class, so I'm going to refresh this, and I'll try to go pretty quick. When he says, I don't understand, he says, lo. That's the word that literally means no, not, non. Idati is yod, dalet, ayin, tav, yod. Well, yod as a prefix means he will, yod as a suffix means my, dalet, ayin, tav is da'at, which means knowledge or understanding. Yada, yod, dalet, ayin, like yada, 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 I know. It's to be familiar with, to get to know someone. Yod, idati, sefer, samik, pei, resh. Well, the word sefer, as in Sefer Torah, literally means book, but we were talking about sefering as connecting the dots. The word sefer is on the chart explained. There's the word bin, which has to do with view, regard, consider, meditate, ponder, weigh. It means like a bridge, like between, like doing an ayin thing. And then the word beneath it is sefer, which is like sefering the stars, connecting the dots, counting numbers, so forth. Suppose you're illiterate. Suppose you don't know how to read. Suppose you don't speak Hebrew. Hopefully this will show you the benefit of this class and of trying to regard these things. And if you say, I'm too old, I can't read it, I don't know, what's on TV anyway? Oh, more things about magic and enchantment and vampires and bewitching and these words. Samik. Do we know what a samik means? We talked about it being like the menorah, about being a good steward doing justly. Pei is the mouth. Resh is an exalted man. But Resh we'll get to that in a couple weeks, but Resh is also the Mashiach coming back, the one exalted one. The two letters that mean men is the Vav and the Resh. The Vav man, Zion, slain outside the gate, we maintain, is the Mashiach who was sent incognito, Baged, Bet Gimel Dalet, camouflaged, Hey, revealed as Vav, the man who was Zion slain, Chet, outside the fence, but was also entombed, Tet, with the round rock rolled in front of him, sealed, Yod by his own hand. So Aleph through Yod, the first 10 letters, says this is what I'm going to do. That's the plan of Yahweh, the Almighty, the Creator, who Bet, manifested in physical creation, Gimmeled as the voyager to Dalet the earth, to reveal the way back to, that we could get back to his kingdom. That's a whole other matter. But the point is, the Resh is him coming back in full glory, hence Resh Shin Tav at the end, which also means to harvest or collect that which is your own, Reshat. Resh, as the song goes, which we'll hopefully sing at the end of the thing here, Resh is like the exalted one. The cliche in the sky is like the book of Revelation talks about it. So when we see the letter Resh, it's like this is the exaltation of the manifestation of all the promises realized full face, because Kuf, the letter that came right before it, at the back of the head, remember Moshe said, can I see your glory? Yahweh, will you show me your glory? He said, you can't see my face. No man can see my face and live, but I'll show you my backside. And so the hope set before us is that we who are of Yahweh, when he does come back, when the Mashiach does appear in the sky, we get to see his face. And perhaps one of the greatest travesties of all human life is that those who are not his won't be able to behold his face. He'll be too bright. And they can't see him, and they'll want the rocks to fall on him. Imagine never getting to see his face. Kind of like the bride behind the veil. Perhaps only we get to see his face. So this picture of the Resh, but this is the pay of the Resh. This word pay Resh is also be fruitful. It's where they get the word par or Peru, which is to be fruitful. It's also the word for bull, which is where you get the word Ephraim, like a bull, Ephraim, which is to say go forth and to multiply the herd. You might get into spreading out and multiplying and bringing life. So if you could say, well, here, if this has to do with the mouth of the exalted Mashiach, exactly like he said, and if you're supposed to connect the dots by looking, remember we talked about it with Noah, he said, I can break your branches off, and I'm the vine, and you're the branches. If you stay in me, that you can do anything. Without me, you can do nothing. And that it's like, so if you look at this imagery and you go, put together the engineered structure as a good steward, the words of the Mashiach, the hand on the door of understanding the covenant that he owns. Lamed is the authority, Aleph is the thing set in motion. So I mentioned before, like this bowler who takes this ball and his arm hooked like a lamed, who takes and rolls the bowling ball down the court. He is the authority that sets this thing in motion. And so the authority that sets it in motion is the one who has the authority to say no. A parent who says no, or a government that says no, if anybody else says no, who gets in trouble? The underling. The authority is the one who has the right to say no. Anybody else who says no gets in trouble, but the authority says no. So who is it that says no? Like the bowler, the one that took it and set the whole thing in motion. Well, that's the Creator. So the Creator, his hand is on the door to understanding his own covenant that he made. How do you do that? You regard the words of the Mashiach as the engineered structure, showing us how it's all put together. If you could understand this, as an illiterate person, looking at the mechanism of the way these letters work, because they're pictures, you've just understood the message of the entire Torah. The suffering of the Torah is simply to regard the words of the Mashiach, who's the manifestation incarnate, full-face view of everything he said regarding understanding his covenant that he set in motion from the very beginning, which is the Aleph. Remember, the word Aleph is to learn Hebrew. Alphon is a class of intensive Hebrew study, which is the way everything works, which he's going to accomplish when he does say, my covenant is to be fully revealed. We'll see that, hey, it all puts together. And how's he going to show his covenant is fully revealed?
I believe he's going to show us how every one of these letters works, with every single word, with every single event that has ever happened on the face of the earth. We'll see, yep, just like he said, going back to, then they'll know that I am Yod Hey Vav Hey, because just like I said, that's the way it happened, and just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not so. And any other voice is there to beguile, bewilder, and bewitch you. It goes on in Isaiah 29:13. Inasmuch as this people has drawn close with its mouth, and with its lips it has honored me, yet it has distanced its heart from me. Their fear or their honor of me, or my mitzvot, which is his commands, is like rote learning of human commands. If we're going to regard Yahweh's words, they're not like human instruction. There's something special about his words. Isaiah 29:14. Therefore, behold, I will continue. That's word Yosef, to continue, like the sofa that which absorbs, to perform more wonders against this people. Wonder upon wonder. That word wonder is pele, as in paleo. And the wisdom of its wise men will be lost, and the understanding of its sages will become concealed. That word concealed is samek tav resh, like we had earlier. Woe to those who try to hide in depths, to conceal counsel from Yahweh. Now, are the people trying to hide in depths and trying to hide their plans from Yahweh? How do you read this? Uncleric, uncholeric. How do you read it? Maybe it's saying, woe to those who try to hide in depths the counsel of Yahweh. Who has the handle, the etz, the ayin zadi, of the advice of the counsel of Yahweh? The clerks, the clerics, the clergy. Woe to those who use their efforts to conceal the advice of Yahweh by intentionally burying it. But Yahweh said here, I'm going to hide the counsel and the understanding of your sages and wise men. What does that mean? Who are the clerks, clerics, and clergy? The sages and the wise men. He's telling us right here, because they have tried to hide and twist my advice, because like with the counsel of Balaam, they know it's what will give Israel the strength and the blessing of the covenant. They are going to take the very words which are Yahweh's advice for strength, and they're going to twist them and try to bury them. And woe to those that will do it, but we are always going to allow it, because it's up to the heart, the free will of the people of Israel to regard Yahweh's words or not. But then it goes on to say this. Who try to conceal from Yahweh, and their deeds are in darkness, they say, who sees them? Who knows? Hey, nobody knows how to read, so we can get away with this. We can make up any translation we want. We can write the concordances. We can write the dictionaries. We can write everything on the internet. And these guys don't know nothing because they don't know how to read. So they go to the internet, they look at Wikipedia or any other source. I was looking at something today because Greek letters are used in mathematics, so I was trying to look up the symbols of mathematics and try to research this other stuff. And one person said, oh, the Greek letters don't mean anything, that's just nonsense. But they do too. In fact, I've got a whole list on the chart. If anybody's interested, one person had something on the blog saying, can everybody tell me what the Greek letters mean? Right here up at the top. Here's the English letters, here's the Greek letters, and there's what the Greek letters mean. And I have right here that it came from Nigel Pennick. It's in reference to we can compare it to what the Hebrew letters mean, because we'll look at the Greek letters and say they're slightly twisted. But they basically mean the same thing. Greek came out of Hebrew. Now listen to this verse 18 of Isaiah 29. On that day, which day? That's a matter of subject to study. The deaf will hear the words of a book, and from darkness and blackness the eyes of blind people will see. Which day is that? Which day? Judgment Day. On Judgment Day, let's say that. On Judgment Day, the deaf will hear the words of the book, and from the darkness and blackness, the eyes of blind people will see. Is it going to do you any good on Judgment Day? No. But what it'll do is say, well, Yahweh was right. Yeah, just like he said. Let me show you something else that this says. And let me see if I can do this. Again, there's many other things I could say. We're running out of time, but if I can show you this one thing, perhaps you will get the purpose of the class. You see, English phrasing is different than Hebrew. It doesn't say in Hebrew that the deaf will hear the words of a book. What it starts off is Ve-Shema. Does anyone remember the first words of the Shema? Shema, Israel. What's the word Shema mean? Hear, believe, and do. It means to regard for the sake of getting the blessing and to comprehend, to understand. Remember, there's this I in here. Shin Mem means place. It also means name. It also means renown and reputation. Mem is that which is birthed out of understanding. So the place that you get birthed out of the understanding, but not just understanding, the regard of doing what you understand, is the blessing that was commanded to Israel that we're supposed to say every day. Which, if you say the words out of your mouth, it's going to have effect because the echoes come back, the ripples, and it starts recalibrating your mind. Just the way when Yahweh spoke to Adam, it went into his brain and booted up his brain, and it will restore you from lunacy, not your personal lunacy, though maybe that, but the lunacy of all of us, which have spun out because of the Babel that came out of Babel, which is the book of Isaiah. Most Sunday, he's following the trail of how we have got to where we are from a couple hundred languages on the face of the earth. He's mapped them all coming out of Hebrew. Hopefully we can get that before the end, but that's the benefit of this book. He shows you the map of how all the languages on the face of the earth came out of Hebrew since the day of Babel. That's what that book tells. There's 7 different ways that the tongue twists things around, convolutes, morphs, and he's got them all mapped, and he can prove it, and it's an astounding book. The origin of speeches, a play on the words, origin of species, and the guy's very clever, and he makes a lot of jokes in there about words. It's interesting. Anyway, Shema means to hear. Beyom, Beyod Vav Mem. In day. Hey, Vav Aleph. It's basically this, but remember we said that the word this was Zion Hey, or Zion Aleph Ha. Those 2 words mean this. This doesn't exactly mean this. This means the revealing of the Vav Aleph, the revealing of the Aleph, connection, the bridge between revealing and of showing the light of the original plan. Plug in the other words that you see on the chart and what these letters mean, and start trying to work out, to massage out the meanings. That's the kind of stuff that Dave Matthews was doing. The next word. Hey. This thing bouncing all over the place, sorry about that. Chet, Resh, Shin, Yod Mem, Ha, Charashim. Well, the word Charash there is translated deaf. The deaf will hear. It doesn't say deaf. If you look in the Red Dictionary, it says deaf, silent, dumb, mute. The deaf will hear? How about a mute person will hear? Well, mute people can hear. There's no big deal about a mute person hearing. It also means an earthenware vessel. It means to cut in, engrave, or plow. Devised, plotted, or fabricated. The fabrication will yield hearing? What fabrication? To fabricate something is to lie. It's an artifice of something reconstructed. It also means silent, secret, magic arts. Why are the magic arts called silent and secret? After all, isn't it occult, ocular, eyeballs wide open, silent, secret? Because it's done quietly, moderately. Secret spells. Why do they call it spells? Because they spell things with letters which form words. It also is the word for thicket, where you get the word cloudy, is I and bet, or something thick like a thick beam or thick clouds, where you also get obscuring of vision. The occult, though it claims to see, obscures vision because it's thick and cloudy. But that's this word there, and so you might say it's almost more like speechless. Those who don't have the language, those who aren't the clergy, those like us that were never told anything about this language, right? So who's going to sing? Who's going to shema? Is that us? Debris, Dalet, Bet, Resh, Dod. Well, the debir is the word of the matter. That's like the deber, im. Debrim is the word Deuteronomy, which is words. But debar is also, as we said, it's the pasture land in front of you. It's the cattle driver that drives you to what's in front of you. It's also the raft or the barge pulled behind you. It's something with something following. What's following your day's work? The reward in front of you, your wages. What's following you if you're pulling a trailer? The trailer's following you. A debar is a matter with something following. Debris
Sounds like the word debris, as in wreckage, right? D-E-B-R-I-S. Debris has to do with what follows wreckage. Debris. The word debris has to do with my word, or that which follows, and then here's that word, samik, pei, resh. So it's translated, the deaf will hear the words of the words of a scroll, the words of the book. And then it goes on to say, Ve mem aleph pei lamed. Well, aleph pei lamed literally means darkened, obscure, gloomy, misfortune, deep darkness, or blacked out. What did Yahweh say he was going to do? He was going to intentionally himself black out the understanding of the wise man. And he was going to obscure the sages from being able to see. So this isn't just darkness. This is Yahweh's obfuscation of allowing his people to know what he's talking about because they chose to not regard his words and to turn to sorcery and the occult. And then the word is mem het som het shin kaf. That's where chosek. Chosek is the place of darkness. But the word chosek is the word used in Genesis 1, where it says the darkness was on the face of the deep. And if you think about it, a het is a container, shin is a fire. And if you've got a fire inside the container, it's kind of like a flashlight. And then a cloth is a covering. If you have a flashlight with a covering, it doesn't put out any light. There's still light inside the flashlight, but you just can't see it because of the covering. The word chosek literally is a picture of a flashlight with a cover on, so it doesn't do any good. So from the place of that covering of darkness, ayin, yod, nun, that's ayin, that's eyeball. Then this is like my eye, or like one's eyeballs. And then you have the word ayin, vav, resh, yod, nun. Well, here's this word ayin, vav, resh. And the root of it is ayin, resh, which is to be vigilant or awake. And then you say vigilant, awake. The crazy 8 pattern of going back to what it sounds like is like, that sounds like the story of the 10 bridesmaids. 5, they all fell asleep, but 5 of them were diligent, and 5 of them weren't. This means to rouse oneself awake, to be lively or incited to activity, to instigate observation, to stir somebody up, to start observing, but it also means to blind. That's the opposite. Remember I said there's 2 voices of every letter, and that all these words can have both meaning and the opposite meaning? And then the last word here, and I'm not sorry to read this, but I'm just putting it here for what it's worth, is Tav, Resh, Aleph, Yod, Nun, Hey. Resh, Aleph, Hey, Resh, Aleph, Yod, is an appearance or an aspect. It's the same as the word for mirror, sight or seeing, form or figure. So it doesn't just mean appearance, it's also a figure or a form. You see an object. It's where you get the word for interview. Resh Aleph Yod Nun. It basically talks about revealing something that's hidden inside. If you put all this stuff together, what you have is those of misguided spirit, well, he goes on to say, excuse me, verse 8, those of misguided spirit will attain understanding, and complainers will learn instruction. I don't have time to go to that, we only have 5 minutes left. But what this has to do with being able to shema, which is hear, believe, and do, with yom, remember he said called the day yom, the light yom, with daylight of understanding, the daylight of everything being clear, the revelation of the bridge to the Aleph, the speechless ones, you might say those that have been bamboozled by the magic arts of the peepers and mutterers, the sorcerers, the keepers of the language, my words of the Sefer, the speechless ones will be able to shema my words of the Sefer that have been scrambled. And the misfortune of the darkened, obscure blacking out Nahosek, though it means darkness, like a flashlight, it also means to make perceptible, to give a concrete form to illustrate. In fact, Het Shin Bet means to think, compute, and to calculate. What is Paleo-Hebrew doing? It's giving a concrete form of illustration, making perceptible that which was blacked out for all these years. For what reason? To incite to aroused activity of the appearance to reveal of what was been hidden, revealing what was inside these letters. What I'm suggesting here, I know it's kind of scrambled, but we've only got a couple minutes left, is that Isaiah 29, verse 21 also says, those people, the meek will increase their joy in Yahweh, and the poor among the people will rejoice in Kadosh Israel. And then in verse 21, of course, and then in verse 21 it says, it's regarding the people who mislead the righteous with falsehood. The same way that Balaam misled Israel with the whoring and the idolatry from Midian, we have been misled with those who are trying to be righteous. We have been misled with the falsehood based on bad words, bad translations, because of misunderstanding the letters, but it came from Yahweh's own hand. The point is, he said he would crowd the eyes, and he did it through the vehicle of people. Remember when Assyria was sent to go in and pillage Israel because they blew off the covenant? He gave Assyria permission to ravage the people and the countryside, and it was horrible, but he said, you guys went too far. Because you took great joy in the slaughter, I will now pull that at your hand. It's like, why did he even let him? But he did. He's done the same thing with these words. Apparently, the clergy and clerics have been given the right to obfuscate, to obscure, to destroy his words from our benefit of getting back the blessing, of getting back the covenant. But he says, woe to those people who have done it. Like he said, woe to Assyria for what pleasure you had. But what he's saying here, at that day? What day? What we're doing and looking at this, taking this class and looking at these words and going back to Hebrew, looks like it's actually fulfilling what this was talking about in Isaiah 29. We who are speechless, who don't know the language, can actually hear Shema, the words of his Sefer, the debir of his Sefer, we can now Shema, though we are speechless, though we're illiterate, because it is giving and making perceptible by figures of form everything that he blacked out that our wise men, you could go on the internet and ask people, and they'll say, this isn't so. I've had somebody who teaches Hebrew tell me, you can't do that. Say, sure you can. Ask Mark Bennett, ask Dave Matthews, ask a bunch of other people. It works. I can show you countless hundreds and hundreds of verses where this stuff plays out true. And he says, in that day. Is this that day? If this is the day when his curse of obfuscating the truth from his people is reversed, it's the Pei-Zadi. It's the opening of the mouth of his words so that we can regard him the inverse of what Balaam did, which is have them break the word and they'll bring the curse. And it all goes back to saying the pay trumps the iron. The iron, yes, it's a cult, but it also, Yeshua said, listen, what goes around comes around. That's the real lion. The judgment scales of whatever you do is going to come back. If you try to hide the words of Yahweh, you will be hidden in the depths on Judgment Day when you're thrown into the fiery burning pit, never seeing his face. That's the right scales of being thrown into the pit. And any so-called mighty one who comes from the other side of the universe to tell us nonsense that might be true, but it's nonsense because it's not the sense that we were given. Yahweh says, these words, Israel, are for your understanding. These words, Israel, are your strength. These words, Israel, are your prosperity, your health. This is your covenant. This is your inheritance. I have given you my word. And for Yeshua himself to be the manifestation of the word in flesh, and for the
the teachers of the Yahudim to tell their people that it wasn't them, that's not cool either. They're going to be in really big trouble. Where they're right is the mythological Jesus who came to destroy the covenant, give us different days, different festivals, and a different people. That's not the real Messiah. They're right about saying it's not Jesus, but they're not right about saying it's not Yeshua. And if they are these people who are trying to obscure and mislead those who have a heart for righteousness with falsehood, listen, any rabbi or any teacher who says to know this language, if he doesn't stand up and account for what these letters mean and what these words mean, you better be careful for yourself. Let me just go about 1 minute left. Let me just show something about this. If anybody thinks that I'm talking blah blah here, what this is, it says organic never-reads, words spelled by the natural sequence, Sefer, Cipher, Sonic, Pei, Resh, the message in the flow. There's an arrow going this way and an arrow going that way. If you look at the words, forget scrambling the letters into different groups, just look at the natural progression. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. The word spelled Aleph, Bet is this word. The word spelled Bet, Gimel is this word. The word spelled Aleph, Bet, Gimel is this word. The word spelled Bet, Gimel, Dalet is that word. And it tells you what it means, with some variation. If you read the alphabet backwards, it works the same way. So this is 2-letter and 3-letter combination pairs. Just reading the alphabet in its natural order. If you try to capture the feeling to Sefer, these word concepts, and then evolve, kind of progress this direction, notice the flow of how the concepts and the matters and the issues change until you get to the top. And then take the words here and move that way. For example, Aleph Bet doesn't just mean father, it's progenitor, prime factor. It's that which starts the whole thing off, whereas in the end of basically Shin Tav, it's Sid, foundation placed upon a basis. It's like he's going with an idea and he's going to end up with a foundation. You read it backwards, anyway, we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but what I'm saying is that this takes time to contemplate, and just to say, what's the language say about itself? The one thing I was going to say about Isaac Moses's book, he has another book where there's 20,000 words from different languages, and he shows you how they all come out of Hebrew. And he calls this study of science, I believe him and some friends of his coined the phrase. And if you look up Edenics, I think it's Edenics.com, but it's Eden, like the Garden of Eden. Edenics. The word Eden is spelled Ayin Dalet Nun. The word Don is Gimel Nun, God Don. But Ayin Dalet, remember, is a witness or a testimony or the commanded gathering. Moed, the place of the commanded gathering. To noon, something, when you have a noon at the end, it's one who's engaged in the business of doing it. So you might say the word Eden is one who's engaged in the process of doing what he was told to do. And the way you know he's a good steward is because the evidence is he's the guy doing what he's told to do. And the word for Eden also means pleasure, delight. The garden of pleasure and delight. It's not just Garden of Eden. See, in English we call that just Eden. What does Eden mean? We don't know. It's Ayin. It's the garden of pleasure and delight. Where is pleasure and delight? Being one who observes the choice to engage in the activity of doing what Yahweh said. There's a pleasure and delight. What have we been told? We don't want to go back under the law. That's slavery. That's cramping your stomach. That's being squashed. We've been freed from the law. We've been freed from the curse of the law. The curse of the law is that we'd be blinded, obscured, kicked out of the land, lose everything, and be dominated by tyrants of our adversaries. We have to go back to the Word. Anyways, next week I was going to go through Psalm 119. That'll be the final Selah before we get into the last Zadi, and then Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. The next week I will show you the mystery that I found in Psalm 119, reading it as the riddle. We're up against the end here.